Hello everyone, and welcome to my new video. In this tutorial, I'll show you step by step how the 3D Red Bull animation you are currently watching was created. We'll go through the entire process in a clear and detailed way. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to support more content like this. If you're ready, let's get started. First, let's create a new composition and give it a suitable name for the project. Then, you can adjust the composition settings as shown on the screen. Once everything is set up, click the OK button to create the composition. This will prepare the main workspace for our project. Now, let's create a new solid layer and rename it to background. Next, apply the gradient ramp effect to this solid layer. This step will help us create a more balanced and professional-looking background for the scene. Now, let's move on to the gradient ramp settings. First, change the ramp shape option to radial ramp. Then, position the darker center in the middle of the composition and increase its size to better fit the scene. Finally, adjust the background colors using the Start Color and End Color settings to achieve the look you want. This will help us create a more visually appealing background for the scene. Now, let's add the smoke video from the Assets section and place it above the background layer in our scene. Then, change the layer's mode setting to Screen. Finally, press T on the keyboard to open the opacity settings and set the opacity value to 20. This will give the background a softer and more atmospheric smoke effect. Now, let's add the particle video to our scene. Then, change the layer's mode setting to Screen. Finally, open the opacity settings and slightly reduce the opacity value to create a more natural look. This will give the background a more dynamic and cinematic feel. Now, let's create a new adjustment layer from the Layer menu. Then, from the Effects and Presets panel, apply the Fast Box Blur effect to this adjustment layer. Finally, set the blur radius value to 3. This will add a subtle and cinematic blur effect to the entire scene. Now, let's add our Red Bull model to the scene. From the Model Settings panel that appears, select Make Comp Size and confirm to place the model into the scene. Next, open the scale settings of the model and increase its size as needed. Now, let's repeat these exact steps for the second Red Bull model to add it to the scene. We currently have two models in our scene. To animate them, let's create a new null object. Next, activate the switch next to the null object layer to convert it into a 3D layer. Finally, parent both Red Bull models to this null object to complete the setup. Now, with the null object selected, press R to reveal the rotation settings. Set the Z rotation value to -45 and create our first keyframe. Next, move forward 40 frames and update the Z rotation value to 45. Now, let's move forward another 120 frames and add another keyframe. Advance another 40 frames and set the Z rotation back to -45. Great! Now select all keyframes and press F9 to apply Easy Ease. Finally, open the graph editor to refine the speed transitions of our animation. Now, let's select our Red Bull models and press R to reveal their rotation settings. For the first model, set the Z rotation to -50 and add our first keyframe. Next, move forward to the 7-second mark and update the Z rotation value to 180. Now, add a keyframe to the Z rotation of the second model and set its value to -200. Move to the end of the timeline and set this Z rotation value to 130. This way, the models will continue to rotate throughout the animation. Finally, select all keyframes and apply Easy Ease to smooth out the motion. Now, let's select the null object layer again and press Shift+P to reveal the position properties. Add a keyframe to the position, then move to the second keyframe point and add another one. Return to the first keyframe and move the model off the bottom of the scene. Now, move to the next keyframe point and add another keyframe. Finally, go to the last keyframe point, copy the initial keyframe, and paste it to the end. Select all position keyframes and apply Easy Ease. Then open the graph editor to refine the speed transitions of our movement. Great! Everything is going well so far. Now, let's add a camera to our scene. With the camera layer selected, right-click on it and choose Create Orbit Null from the Camera menu. This will generate a dedicated null object that allows us to control our camera movements much more effectively. Now, let's open the position settings for our camera layer and move it back along the Z-axis to get a better view of the scene. Next, go to the second keyframe point of the position and add a keyframe to our null object. Move forward 30 frames and zoom in on our models with the camera. Then, advance 80 frames and add another keyframe. Move forward 30 more frames. Select the initial keyframe, copy it, and paste it to the end. Finally, select all keyframes and apply Easy Ease. Then open the graph editor to refine the speed transitions of our motion. Great! Everything is going according to plan so far. Now, let's add a light to our scene. Change the light type to Environment and click OK to add the light. Next, import our HDR image into the scene. From the light settings, select our HDR image in the source field. Finally, open the transform settings and adjust the X and Y rotation values to find the perfect lighting angle. To see the results, you can toggle the eye icon next to the light layer to turn it on and off and observe the difference. Now, we have reached the most critical part of our tutorial. To apply our effects correctly, we first need to export this model. Select only your target model, go to File, and choose Add to Render Queue from the Export menu. In the Render Settings panel that appears, there are some important configurations. First, click on Output Module and change the format to QuickTime. The most important detail here is to set the channels to RGB plus alpha. This ensures that the model's background is rendered as transparent. Next, click on Output To to select your destination folder. Once all settings are ready, hit the Render button and wait for your video to finish exporting. Great, now let's return to our main composition. Double-click in the Project panel to import the video we just exported and then add it to our scene. To avoid any confusion, let's disable the original 3D model layer and hide it in our workspace. Next, select the Camera Null Object layer and press U on your keyboard to reveal all active keyframes. Move to the second keyframe, the moment the model is closest to the camera, as this is where we will apply our effect. Finally, ensure no layers are selected in the scene, then double-click the Rectangle tool to create a new shape layer that perfectly matches the size of your composition. Now let's open the rotation settings for our shape layer. Rotate it to align perfectly with the model and increase its size to position it right beneath the model. Feel free to make small adjustments here for a more professional result. Then, grab the start of the shape layer and trim it to begin exactly when the effect should trigger. Now, open the position settings for the shape layer and add our first keyframe. Move to the next keyframe point and adjust the position precisely so that the shape layer completely covers the model. Now, move to a point near the middle of our animation. From the Effects and Presets panel, search for Turbulent Displace and apply it to our shape layer. Next, go to the Effect Controls panel. Set the amount to 25 and the size to 300. Finally, set the complexity to 10 to achieve that characteristic distorted edge look. Now, select your Red Bull model layer and set the track matte to the shape layer below it. This will perfectly apply the distorted edge effect we just created directly onto the edges of our model. Now, select both layers, pre-compose them, and give the composition a clear name to avoid any confusion. Next, select that pre-comp layer and duplicate it. Select the bottom layer and set it as a track matte for the layer above. Since we need to invert this mask, go ahead and check the second box in the track matte panel. You might notice the screen goes blank for a moment. That's normal. Simply move the top layer forward by 1 frame in the timeline, and everything will reappear. Now, to clean up any visible outer edges, we'll use the Minimax effect. From the Effects and Presets panel, apply Minimax to the bottom layer. In the Effect controls, set the operation to minimum and the channel to alpha. Finally, set the radius to 1, which will seamlessly hide those harsh outer edges. Now, since the distortion area feels a bit small, let's move the top layer forward by 1 more frame. Set the workspace to fit to get a better look. Everything is looking great. Select both layers, pre-compose them, and give it a clear name. Now for the visual effects. Apply the Fill effect from the Effects and Presets panel to this layer. In the Effect controls, pick a vibrant color from the color picker that matches our flame effect. Next, apply Deep Glow to achieve that premium glow. If it's too intense, adjust the glow settings until you get the perfect balance. Now, duplicate the layer and change its color to add more depth to our look. If the layer below isn't visible, apply the simple choker effect and make sure to drag it to the top of the effect stack. Finally, increase the choke matte value to shrink the layer inward. This will reveal both the bottom and top layers, blending them perfectly. Everything is looking great so far. Now, let's move our original Red Bull model layer to the bottom and make it visible. After a quick preview, you can see that it looks like our model is emerging from the flames. We have one minor issue to fix. To hide the extra effects beneath the model, move to the exact moment the model is fully formed. Place the clean video footage of the model on top of all other layers and trim its start point there. Then, select the 3 effect layers below and trim their endpoints to align with this scene. Finally, go back to the start of the effect and trim the beginning of those layers accordingly. This perfectly aligns our timing. Now, let's add our pre-made particle effects to the scene. Align them exactly with the moment the camera zooms into the model. Use Scale to adjust the size and Rotation to match the model's angle perfectly. After fine-tuning for the best look, place these particle layers behind both models. Repeat the same process for the second particle video, ensuring everything is perfectly sized and rotated. Once everything is set, do a final detailed pass to make any small adjustments. Great, everything looks perfect so far. As a final step, import the Red Bull outro animation we prepared earlier and place it at the very end of our composition. This ensures that once the main scene finishes, the final outro kicks in, completing our animation with a professional finish. And here it is! Our project is ready. Let's render it out and take a look at the final result. It turned out to be really clean and aesthetic. If you found this video helpful and want to see more high-level tutorials like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to keep creating content. See you in the next tutorial!